The biggest political victory in 129 years. Can you believe that, Newt? 120. They said the most consequential election in the last 129 years. Wow, that's something. So we swept all swing states.
What would a second term for Donald Trump look like? Would it be a continuation of his first term, or could we see significant changes? With fresh challenges and shifting dynamics, a second Trump presidency promises to be anything but predictable. Here's what might be different. The first thing to consider is how Trump's policy goals have evolved since he left office. Since leaving office, Trump's policy goals have evolved, but many of his priorities remain the same, like strengthening the economy and tackling immigration. What's different now is his increased focus on finishing the work that he started. He's determined to build on his past successes and make bigger changes, especially in areas where he believes that the government or certain agencies didn't fully back him before. One of his main goals is to boost the US economy, with an emphasis on energy independence and reducing reliance on foreign sources. Trump's also pushing for deeper cuts in federal regulations, believing that they hurt American businesses. Immigration's another top priority, where he's calling for tougher policies to secure the border and reduce illegal entry. Additionally, Trump's proposed restructuring federal agencies, aiming for a more efficient government. Overall, his message is clear. He wants to finish what he started and make sweeping changes to the system, focusing on economic growth, national security, and less government interference. One area where Donald Trump's message has stayed the same is immigration. Building a wall along the southern US border was a key promise in his first campaign, and he made significant progress on it during his presidency, constructing around 452 miles of barriers. Now he's promising to finish the wall and take even stronger action on immigration enforcement within the US. Trump's plans go beyond just securing the border. He's talking about ramping up deportations, including removing people who've lived in the country for many years. He also wants to make it harder for people to enter the US legally, tightening visa requirements and cracking down on illegal immigration. In Trump's view, these measures will ease the pressure on the US economy, protect American jobs, and strengthen national security. His approach is clear: secure the border, reduce illegal immigration, and make sure the system works for American citizens first. Implementing Trump's tougher immigration policies could be complicated. For one, mass deportations would require a lot of federal resources and coordination with local governments, many of which may not be on board. Some local authorities have different views on immigration and may resist federal efforts to carry out deportations, especially in so-called sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities like New York and Los Angeles limit their cooperation with federal immigration enforcement, which could lead to a standoff between local leaders and the federal government. If Trump pushes for stricter enforcement, it could spark tension between these cities and federal agencies, making it harder to carry out his immigration plans. This kind of conflict could slow down or even block parts of his agenda, especially since local governments play a big role in how immigration laws are enforced. It's clear that while Trump's immigration proposals are ambitious, putting them into action will require overcoming significant challenges, including balancing federal power with local resistance. Another key part of Trump's immigration policy is tightening legal immigration, focusing more on merit-based criteria. This means that he wants to prioritize people who have specific skills, education, or job qualifications, rather than those coming to the US based on family ties. Trump argues that this would help bring in individuals who can contribute more directly to the US economy and reduce the strain on public resources. Under this approach, Trump's administration would likely cut down on the number of refugees admitted and impose stricter rules on asylum seekers. His goal is to focus on immigration that benefits the US by bringing in workers who are needed in the economy, while reducing what he sees as unnecessary burdens like taking in people who might require more support. While this policy could make it harder for some to immigrate, Trump believes it will help the country by bringing in people who can fill critical job gaps and contribute to long-term growth. However, critics argue that it could limit opportunities for families and leave out vulnerable groups like refugees and asylum seekers who need protection. Trump's criticism of the deep state and firmly established government bureaucracy has only grown stronger since he left office. He often blames these firmly established forces for what he sees as attempts to undermine his policies. In a second term, Trump has proposed major structural changes to federal agencies to make them more aligned with his administration's goals. One of his key ideas is to classify more federal employees as political appointees. This change would allow him to replace thousands of career civil servants with loyalists, making it easier to implement his agenda without facing internal resistance. Supporters of Trump's approach to government reform argue that giving the president more control over federal agencies could make the government more efficient and better aligned with the president's policies. They believe that this would help speed up decision-making and make agencies more responsive to the people's will. But is it really that simple? Critics warn that giving the president more power over agencies like the FBI and the Department of Justice could politicize institutions that are meant to be independent. These agencies are designed to act without political influence, but if they're seen as extensions of the president's agenda, it could undermine their credibility. Could this lead to biased decisions or inconsistent services? For example, if the FBI and DOJ are perceived as following political orders, it could hurt public trust in their fairness and neutrality. The big question is whether a more politicized government will serve the public interest or create divisions and distrust. Balancing efficiency with impartiality is a delicate issue, and it could shape how the public views government agencies for years to come. Beyond staffing changes, Trump's also spoken about reducing regulations across federal agencies. He views many regulations as barriers to economic growth, particularly in sectors like energy and manufacturing. For example, during his first term, Trump rolled back numerous environmental regulations to encourage fossil fuel production, and he'd likely push even further in a second term. He believes this approach will make the US more energy independent and reduce reliance on foreign energy. However, environmentalists caution that rolling back these protections could have serious consequences for air quality, water safety, and climate change, potentially harming long-term public health and environmental sustainability. Trump's economic vision centers on making America more self-sufficient and less dependent on foreign trade. One of his boldest proposals for a second term is to implement a 10% tariff on all imports. He argues that this tax would help revive American manufacturing by making foreign goods more expensive, thereby encouraging consumers to buy American products instead. It's a classic protectionist approach aimed at reviving domestic industries, especially in areas like steel and automotive manufacturing. While Trump supporters see tariffs as a way to bring back jobs and protect American industries, critics warn that such broad tariffs could drive up prices for everyday goods. The added cost of tariffs on products like electronics, clothing, and household items would likely be passed on to consumers, potentially raising the cost of living for American families. Economists also worry about the potential for retaliatory tariffs from other countries, which could hurt US exporters and create further strain on international trade relationships. In addition to tariffs, Trump's economic plans include more deregulation and tax cuts. He believes that reducing government intervention will allow businesses to grow, innovate, and create jobs. By cutting red tape, Trump wants to create a pro-business environment where companies can thrive. His goal is to stimulate economic growth by giving businesses more freedom to operate without the burden of excessive regulations. But will this approach work for everyone? While many businesses may benefit from less regulation, critics worry about the potential downsides. For example, deregulation could lead to fewer consumer protections, leaving people vulnerable in areas like healthcare and finance. If industries aren't closely monitored, could it result in risky practices that harm consumers or damage the economy? Trump supporters argue that a low-regulation environment is necessary for long-term growth, but others caution that some level of oversight is essential to protect the public. The debate is ongoing, and the challenge will be finding a balance that fosters economic growth while still safeguarding the interests of consumers and workers. Trump's America First foreign policy would likely continue if he's re-elected, focusing on strong US interests and a more cautious approach to international alliances. He's often criticized NATO and other global organizations, arguing that the US carries too much of the financial and military burden. During his first term, Trump pushed NATO allies to increase their defense spending, and he'd likely push even harder for this if he returns to office. But what does this mean for the future of NATO? With tensions rising in Eastern Europe, especially with the ongoing war in Ukraine, Trump's stance on NATO has raised concerns. he signalled that he might question how much the US should be involved in conflicts overseas, especially if they don't directly benefit the US. This could lead to reduced military and financial support for NATO allies, which could strain relationships. While Trump's supporters argue that focusing on America's own needs is essential, critics worry that pulling back from international commitments might weaken alliances and give adversaries like Russia and China more influence. The big question is, will putting America first risk undermining global stability? In terms of specific international relationships, Trump has hinted at a more transactional approach with countries like China and Russia. His administration was marked by a trade war with China, involving tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of goods. This confrontational stance might continue, with Trump pushing for policies that he believes would address trade imbalance and protect American jobs. At the same time, Trump signalled interest in improving relations with Russia, which has led to concerns about how his foreign policy could shift US alliances and commitments, especially in light of Russia's recent actions in Ukraine. Trump's also indicated that he might reconsider America's role in global organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and others that he believes do not align with US interests. He previously moved to withdraw the US from the WHO and has expressed skepticism about the effectiveness of multilateral institutions, suggesting that his foreign policy would focus more on bilateral agreements where he sees greater leverage. Trump's vision for domestic policy also includes social and educational reforms that reflect his conservative values. One of his key ideas is promoting patriotic education in schools. He believes American history should be taught in a way that highlights the nation's successes and achievements, rather than focusing too much on its flaws. This approach would minimize what he sees as divisive topics like slavery and other controversial parts of history. Trump's also been vocal about banning critical race theory from school curricula. He argues that CRT promotes a negative view of American history and encourages racial divisions. But is it enough to simply teach patriotic history, or do we risk glossing over important lessons by avoiding tough topics? Trump's stance on education could lead to a significant shift in how history and social issues are taught in schools. But it also raises questions about balancing patriotism with honesty and inclusivity. Will this approach prepare students for the diverse, complex world that they face? On law enforcement, Trump's been vocal about the need to tackle rising crime rates in major cities. His proposed policies involve greater federal intervention in areas where local governments, he argues, have been ineffective. Trump's plan could mean deploying federal agents to assist local law enforcement or even overriding local policies to enforce stricter law and order measures. He frames this as a way to restore public safety, particularly in cities struggling with high crime rates. This approach is popular among those who believe that rising crime threatens community stability and economic growth. However, it's also controversial, as critics argue that federal intervention in local law enforcement could violate states' rights and lead to tensions between local and federal authorities. Additionally, some believe that this approach risks inflaming existing tensions between law enforcement and certain communities, especially communities of colour that have historically been disproportionately affected by aggressive policing practices. As ambitious as his plans are, Trump would face numerous challenges in implementing them. For one, control of Congress is a key factor. If the Senate or House remains in Democratic hands, they could obstruct or significantly alter many of Trump's proposals. Unlike executive orders, which a president can issue independently, major policy changes often require legislative support. Without a cooperative Congress, Trump's vision might encounter significant roadblocks. Legal challenges could be a major hurdle for Trump, especially with policies that push the boundaries of executive power. For example, his proposals to expand federal agencies' powers or restrict certain rights, like asylum claims, could lead to lawsuits. These legal battles might delay or even block his initiatives, causing frustration for his administration. Trump's style of governance might also affect his ability to build alliances within the federal government and beyond. Known for his direct and often confrontational approach, Trump's not hesitated to criticize those that he views as obstacles, including members of Congress, federal judges, and even former members of his own administration. In a second term, it's likely that he'd continue this style, which could lead to tension with other branches of government as well as with state and local authorities. Supporters admire his tough talk and willingness to go against the grain, But this approach has sometimes strained relationships that could be crucial for implementing his agenda. One thing that's almost certain is that Trump would continue to communicate directly with his supporters through social media, especially on his own platform, Truth Social. After being banned from Twitter and other major social media networks during his first term, Trump's built a following on Truth Social, where he can speak to his base without the constraints of traditional media. How Trump would balance this goal with protections for private businesses under US law remains a question. Any regulatory push against big tech companies would likely face legal challenges as well as resistance from Congress, if the proposal's seen as infringing on free speech or business rights. However, Trump's criticism of the media and social media platforms has resonated with a large segment of his supporters who feel that their voices aren't fairly represented. What would a Trump second term really mean? In essence, Trump's second term would likely be marked by more assertive attempts to achieve the goals he set in his first term. With a sharper focus on consolidating power within the executive branch and reshaping the federal government to align with his vision, his stance on immigration, foreign policy, federal regulation, and social issues reflects a continuation of his America First principles, but with a stronger emphasis on cutting bureaucracy and reducing the influence of what he calls the deep state. Would his plans bring about the changes that he envisions, or would they lead to increased tension and division within the country? Trump's critics worry that his policies could undermine democratic norms, damage alliances, and increase polarization. But for his supporters, a second Trump term is seen as an opportunity to fully realize the changes that he started in his first term, removing barriers that they believe are holding back America. As the country moves into a new chapter with Donald Trump's return to the White House, the questions about America's future remain central to the debate. Trump's vision for a leaner, tougher government has resonated with voters, and now his policies are reshaping both the US and its role on the world stage. A second term's proving to be just as ambitious, complex, and controversial as the first, if not more so. Time will tell how it all unfolds, but one thing's for sure, Trump's presidency is far from predictable. A second term for Trump could look very different, with new challenges and a changed political landscape. Whatever happens, it's bound to be a ride full of surprises. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our latest updates. Do let us know your thoughts in the comments section. We'll see you guys next time.